My name's Mohammed Amin Evans. I was born in Birmingham just over 60 years ago in Small Heath, and my parents weren't particularly religious, but they did have me baptised as a Methodist and later sent me to a Chapel Methodist Sunday school. My childhood was a typical working class, white post-colonial upbringing, where a lot of things that would be unacceptable now were perfectly acceptable. A degree of open racism, which was very annoying at the time. My father always spoke out against racism, and he was a staunch trade unionist and involved in Workers' Education Association. And so we were raised never to say anything of a racist nature in the household, in a society where it was common to make jokes about black people, turbans, etc. I think I always had an interest in religions, although not from a very religious family. I was very interested in Egyptian religions from about the age of 4. And this moved on to a general study of Eastern religions. I think at the age of 12 or 13, I read Christmas Humphrey's book on Buddhism and started looking at other faiths. By the age of 14 or 15, I was familiar with the Gita and various other works of world religions. And eventually, I did do a degree with religious studies as the named subject. In, say, the 1960s, 70s, up into the 1980s, Muslims were not very engaged in Dawah, and most of the Muslims in the UK were ordinary working people. And so if you asked a Muslim what he believed, he would tell you something like, "We believe in being good to our parents." He'd wish you salam and disappear as quickly as possible, as most people do when they're taken out of their safety zone. I think in about 1974 or 75, there were comments in the press or on television about Islamic attitudes to women. And at a friend's house, she was a Hindu lady, I borrowed her copy of the Quran to read Surat An-Nisa. And my conclusion on reading that, and this was the first Quran I'd ever read, obviously in English translation, was that the Quran was the word of God, and that, and I'm using the words I used then, Muhammad was probably a prophet. Of course now I add glorifications and other such devices to the name of the Prophet, peace be upon him. But this was the impression in an isolated reading, and it would have been in the early 90s that I actually met a Muslim lady, and she said to me, "Well, you act like a Muslim and you think like a Muslim. Why don't you become a Muslim?" It's the switching of the lowercase and capital M's, I think. So I said to her, "I'll read the Quran, and if I don't find any problems with it, I'll become a Muslim." It's quite amazing looking back that you can approach a work like the Quran thinking that you might have problems. And so basically I started to read the Quran, and I was reading a few pages per night. And when I was about halfway through, I thought, well, I've read enough, I'm going to finish this. but I'm going off to recite the Shahada. And so I went to Birmingham Central Mosque and met Dr. Naseem and the then Imam of the place, and recited Shahada. There I was with armed with a Quran and having read a lot of books at about the age of 42, 43, something like that. In my reading at that time, I came across an awful lot of references to Shiism. But I came from a Western background, a post-war, post-colonial background, so I had seen the propaganda put out by the Third Reich and by the Soviet Union and, of course, Communist China. And when I read some of this stuff, I wasn't horrified as, boogeyman story. I just went instantly, this is just propaganda. If they had something substantial, why haven't they published it? And so I used to go and visit my mother on the other side of the city. And the bus drove past a Shia information centre. And so I decided to go in and give salams to the Shia brothers there and find out what they said. I'm never content being told by others what these third party says. And I decided to go and talk to them. What I found there was an intellectual discourse about religion, a concern about historiography and accuracy. And thus I'd actually unwittingly found the branch of Islam that suited me. And so I joined the Hausa in Birmingham, and for the next, I think, 5 years, I was working 18 hours a day studying and giving lectures in mosques and helping to bury people, helping to marry them. And it got to the point where one day I saw a newspaper and there was a different Prime Minister and all the cars had changed. And so even though I was in the middle of a Western city, for 4 or 5 years I'd seen nothing really except my studies and the inside of the mosque and the madrasa. And it was quite a shock to become so isolated in study. And I've spent many years since getting back into being able to carry my understanding of Islam to an ever wider audience. So I speak now in all sorts of places, schools, colleges, workplaces. A lot of new Muslims complain quite bitterly about aspects of the born or the established Muslim community. But it's my experience that there's as much trouble coming from converts as there is coming from conservative elements within the existing ummah, and both sides need to think about why and what they're doing culturally and religiously, and how they explain things to each other. In this way we can avoid a lot of issues. I heard the other day that the Olympics are being regarded as an opportunity for a great dawah effort. I was quite amused by this, because if I were coming to see the Olympics, the last thing I would want to do is for somebody to run up with a pamphlet and saying we can save you. But I would be interested in returning to the practices of the family that raised Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And I would see our dawah to actually be tabligh and to reach out as human beings and perhaps give them free bottles of water and a blessing rather than a 20-minute lecture on a street course and a free tape of poorly articulated English. But I think this is, again, whether we're living Islam or whether we're seeing it as some kind of product that we sell. I think we should live it. Scholars need books and writing materials, so this is my collection, my working library, and I have these are books on different religions and different philosophy. I have more general Islamic books down there and works by Ibadi scholars and various branches of Islam and on heresiography. And then books that I use in work as an Islamic scholar. So starting with Qurans, this is one of my proudest possessions. Of course I've got Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, Tahdhib al-Ahkam, Man la Yadurru Faqih and Al-Kafi. When I sit down and write something, I don't just make things up out of my head. Everything needs to be backed up with proper academic discipline in referencing so that other people can develop their thinking from it. What might surprise some Muslims is I also have some records. These are classical music and also examples of different musical religious expressions. I used to work in the music industry or the periphery of the music industry in the jazz world, taking photographs, and these are some of the photographs I took while I was working there. This one is of Digby Fairweather, and I sent him a copy of this print, and he said he loved it and that he was going to use it as an album cover. It's really gratifying when you do something and someone else appreciates the work you've done. The thing I carried from this into Islam is we have an emphasis on thanking people and rewarding people properly that we often forget to do. We forget about who's serving the food in the mosque, and we sort of treat volunteers as if they're slaves or at best servants. When you take photographs like this, your best friend is probably the editor's waste paper bin, because he just throws your rubbish in. But when an editor says, thank you, I'm going to use that, it really means more than any money they ever paid for the work, or more than what you spend on the equipment. And that's something that I carry from this life on in my Islamic practice. I try to remember to say thank you to people. And when I go to mosques or churches, I always look for the caretaker and make sure I shake his hand as well. Because the mosque secretary may hand you a little bundle of something, but the person who's made the whole evening possible and run smoothly is somebody standing at the back of the hall. I was also the mosque caretaker at Clifton Road to pay for my studies for a while. And at that time, I'd recently visited Sheikh Mohsin Iraqi at the Islamic Centre of England in London. And when he came to the mosque, I was carrying 2 waste bin bags out, and all the mosque committee was standing lined up, ready to greet the Wakil of Sayyid Ali Khamenei. And he walked through the door, and he looked past them, and he saw me, and he went, Ameen! And he came over, and we greeted each other as scholars do, while all the suited people sort of stood there going, And so it's a question of the calibre of the man. And what I find with the truly great scholars is they are the ones that bring you tea. You don't have to bring them anything. And it means a lot when a great scholar, a scholar with political power as well and influence, takes time to go out of the room and come back with a cup of tea for you and all his guests. So part of the Hausa learning process isn't just the books and the Islamic sciences, it's learning how to behave properly, and you learn this from your teachers and great scholars. I'm standing in the car park of the Kosher Ithna Asheri community of Birmingham, and this is really the first mosque that I felt at home in. This mosque was very important to us as students because it was here in the mosque and in the Imam Bargah to my right that we learned how to deliver lectures. If I can do it at my age and with my ethnicity, anyone is capable of fulfilling their destiny, their ambition, and this is what we should be doing, learning and using it. As Imam Ali alayhi salam said, the best of knowledge is that which is manifested in the hands, i.e. doing things, and that which remains on the tongue is just rubbish. Students and communities have to apply this in everything they do. This is the Al-Mahdi Institute, and this is now the purely English section of the library. But going back about 17 years, this was my office here after we renovated the building, and it was here that we launched campaigns of interfaith engagement and support for new Muslims, as well as doing explanations of Islamic law in English and preparing our own researches and studies. So that this room was particularly important just after the events of 9/11, because I had already spent 5 or 6 years building interfaith contacts, and so as soon as it happened, I was on the phone to my friends in churches and various temples and invited them to Friday prayers at the Clifton Road Mosque, which is just around the corner. And they all came out, and we made a public display of walking around the area together, arm in arm, etc., and with local police officers, to give a message that there wasn't a threat from Muslims and there was no need for any sort of backlash. And I then spent the rest of the weekend going to church, working with interfaith groups that offer the potential for Islam to express itself truly as it is and not conform to a Western expectation of what Islam should be. My work in interfaith and in legal issues and political issues as well is to say that to be valid and to have integrity, any solutions that we as Muslim scholars put forward must be drawn from Islamic primary sources, that we are not reacting to what a Western fashion in morality or ethics says, but we return to our core values and we do what we know is right, not just what will please people around us. This is perhaps a harder path. It's very easy to flatter and please people and to say, oh, us Muslims are just like you. The truth is we are not just like other people because we put our morality and our ethics in first place and not as an afterthought in our lives. So we need to tell the truth at every opportunity. And since I'm not dependent on wages, I can tell the truth very often. One of our big Islamic principles is that knowledge and the acquisition of knowledge is a religious duty. If the parents aren't acquiring knowledge, it's giving a message to the children that we shouldn't really believe in our Islamic principles, that they don't matter somehow. And so encouraging children to learn and debate are important matters. On interfaith visits, when he's available, I take my son Martin, he's 12 now, and I think he's more popular than I am. Everyone at lectures, when they contact me afterwards, ask, how's Martin doing? So children are not only a long-term investment, but if you raise your children to have good akhlaq, they're better than most highly trained scholars, as troops, as people who spread Islam. And I think that's what parents should aspire to do. Well-educated, healthy children.
He's a friend and the dad rolled into one, so there's not much arguing between us. He usually calls me Buddy instead of my name, or he'll call me Marty. So we're quite close. He teaches me a lot about science, and he teaches me about jet engines and about religion. And like, I asked him if it was okay if I believe in evolution, and then he explained to me how it was okay for Muslims. And there's sometimes a Christian idea of creation and stuff.
In entering Islam, of course, I had to tell my family. And my older brother is quite a right-wing Zen Buddhist, and he was a black belt in several styles of karate and martial arts. He just said, oh, okay, I always thought you would. My younger brother was okay. He said, well, I would, but I like wine too much. And my mother said, oh, don't worry, as long as you still believe in Jesus, I suppose it's okay. Other converts have had terrible experiences being disowned, thrown out of their houses. I've worked a lot with people before, during and after giving Shahada. And some of the cases are heartbreaking. What people they thought loved them, the lengths they'll go to exclude them or any mention of them from the family setting. And my family were quite wonderful. My mother, not long before she died, about a year before, she was in hospital, and Sheikh Arif and I both went to visit her in hospital, and we'd come from some official engagement, so we were in full libas, turbans, robes, abars, and we swept in there, and all the nurses jump out the way because they think we're bishops. And went up to my mother's bed, and she said, oh, you look wonderful dressed like that. It really was worth you becoming a Muslim. And ever afterwards then, she would say how grand I looked in all my robes and how proud it had made her feel to have two visitors turn up like that. It made her a celebrity in the ward. So we need to think about benefits. Often people try to hide their Islamic identity and be very Western. And I've always found the more I push it in a reasoned and reasonable manner, the better the response I get, where other Muslims have had bad responses. So I tend to use this as my first tactic, to declare I'm a Muslim, to declare I'm a Shiite, and that I'm speaking from that perspective.